It all started with a simple letter. It was one of those generic HOA notices that everyone in the neighborhood gets from time to time. A polite reminder about keeping the lawn trimmed or the mailbox in line with community standards. But this letter was different. This one was a warning. It wasn't from the usual HOA committee members. No, this one was signed by Karen, the HOA president who had been running the neighborhood with an iron fist for years. Your property doesn't meet HOA guidelines, it said. And unless you take immediate action, we'll be forced to take legal action to resolve the situation. I stared at the letter, confused. What on earth had I done wrong? I had been meticulous about keeping my yard in perfect condition. My lawn was always cut, my house painted, and the garden well maintained. I had no idea what Karen was talking about. A few days later, I received a knock on my door. It was Karen herself, standing in front of me with that familiar smug smile plastered across her face. "You received the letter, I assume?" she asked, not even waiting for me to answer. "Your property needs to be brought up to code. There's a fine for failing to comply." I was taken aback. "Fine? What are you talking about? I've followed all the rules. My property is in perfect shape." She took a step forward, looking me up and down as if she were inspecting the yard herself. "You'll need to replace the fencing in the backyard. It's not the right height and the wrong material. I've already given you plenty of warnings. If you don't take care of it immediately, I'll have to report you to the HOA board." I couldn't believe it. The fence was just a simple wooden structure I had put up to give me some privacy, and it had always been within the guidelines. But Karen wasn't having it. I tried to argue, but she wouldn't listen. She was convinced that my fence was a violation of HOA rules, and she was prepared to make my life miserable over it. After a heated exchange, she gave me a week to remove the fence and replace it, or face the wrath of the HOA board. As she walked off, I stood there in disbelief. Karen had always been a little difficult, but this was something else. She had no right to interfere with my property like this. The following week, I did some research. I read through the HOA rules and regulations cover to cover, looking for anything that could give me leverage in this situation. To my surprise, I found nothing in the guidelines that specified my fence was a violation. In fact, my property seemed to comply with every single rule. So why was Karen being so insistent? I decided to take matters into my own hands. I took pictures of the fence, along with the rest of the property, and sent them to the HOA board. I requested a formal meeting to resolve the issue. I figured that with the board's input, Karen wouldn't be able to bully me anymore. The meeting was set for the following week, and when I arrived, I was shocked by what I saw. Karen wasn't just some overly involved neighborhood president. She was deeply entrenched in a web of control that went far beyond simple HOA management. The room was filled with people who looked almost too eager to agree with everything she said. Karen had the power to sway opinions and force decisions in her favor, and it became clear to me that this wasn't just about a fence. When the meeting began, I stood up, ready to present my case. I outlined how my property followed all the HOA rules and how Karen's actions seemed overblown and completely unjustified. But Karen didn't let me speak freely for long. She interrupted constantly, making snide remarks and trying to sway the other board members with her own version of the truth. It wasn't until one of the board members, someone who had been quiet throughout the meeting, spoke up that things started to shift. "I've been noticing the same thing," the member said. "Karen's been a bit too focused on certain properties lately. I've had my own concerns." The room fell silent, and for the first time, Karen looked visibly uncomfortable. She tried to change the subject, but it was too late. The board had taken notice, and they started questioning her about her motives. The spotlight shifted onto her, and that's when I realized something. Karen wasn't just a petty HOA president. She was hiding something far more sinister. As the meeting continued, more questions were raised about Karen's conduct. I stayed silent as they dug into her actions, uncovering discrepancies in the way she had been handling various fines and fees in the neighborhood. But the most shocking revelation came when one board member mentioned a financial irregularity in the HOA accounts. There were discrepancies in the funds that seemed to be unaccounted for, and Karen was the one who managed those funds. At that moment, it hit me. This wasn't about offense. This wasn't about following some minor rules. Karen had been using her position to secretly funnel money into something much more dangerous. She had been exploiting the HOA for her own benefit, and now I was caught in the crossfire. The next few weeks were a blur. The board had begun an official investigation into Karen's activities, and it became clear that there was something much larger at play. It wasn't just about defense or her petty control over the neighborhood. Karen was involved in a massive scheme, a scheme that involved money laundering, real estate fraud, and illegal dealings with developers who were exploiting properties across the city. I started digging into her background, researching every move she had made in the last few years. It didn't take long before I uncovered something truly shocking. Karen had been using the HOA as a cover for a multi-million-dollar scheme that involved buying properties for far less than they were worth and flipping them to developers. She was making a fortune off the backs of unsuspecting homeowners, all while maintaining the illusion of being a concerned community leader. I had uncovered the tip of the iceberg. I knew that if I didn't act fast, Karen would do whatever she could to cover her tracks. She had far more power and resources than I had anticipated, and I realized just how deep her corruption ran. I called the authorities, ready to expose everything I had learned. I provided them with the evidence, property deeds, financial records, and the shady deals Karen had been orchestrating behind closed doors. It was time to take her down, once and for all. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. The more I dug, the more I realized just how dangerous she really was. She had connections everywhere, and she wasn't afraid to use them. Every step I took, she countered, using her influence to try and shut me down. It became a game of cat and mouse. I had to stay one step ahead of her, exposing her lies while trying to protect myself from the consequences. Karen wasn't just a woman with too much time on her hands. She was a mastermind, and I had unknowingly stumbled into the middle of her empire. The deeper I went, the more I realized that Karen's scheme was much bigger than just the HOA. She was involved with corrupt developers, money laundering operations, and even criminal organizations that were hiding in the shadows. She had built an empire on deception, and now it was all starting to unravel. I wasn't just fighting for my property anymore. I was fighting for justice, for the people who had been deceived, and for the neighborhood that had been taken advantage of for far too long. But as I uncovered more and more, I started to wonder, how far was Karen willing to go to protect herself? How far would I have to go to make sure she paid for everything she had done? I was on edge, and every day felt like a battle. The investigation into Karen's dealings was accelerating, but Karen was no rookie. She wasn't just some neighborhood tyrant. She had experience covering her tracks. I had no doubt she knew the authorities were closing in on her, and with every move I made, I knew she would counter it, pushing back even harder. My phone buzzed one afternoon with an encrypted message. It was from Sarah. She had uncovered something I hadn't expected. Karen wasn't just using the HOA to line her pockets. She had a hidden network of shell companies tied to multiple properties across the city, and the money was being funneled into offshore accounts. But that wasn't even the worst part. The kicker was that Karen was acting as the intermediary between several international corporations and corrupt city officials, allowing her to get away with it for years. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of this new discovery sink in. I had uncovered so much already, but this was the final piece of the puzzle. Karen wasn't just a small-time fraudster. She was operating on a global scale. Her influence reached into the highest offices in the city. She had built an empire using the HOA as a front, while secretly profiting from real estate deals, money laundering, and illicit deals that spanned continents. I couldn't allow her to continue with this scheme. But as I sat there processing the depth of it all, the reality hit me. If Karen was this well-connected, could I even trust the authorities to go after her? She might have her hands in every corner of the city's operations. Could anyone take her down without fear of retaliation? The more I thought about it, the more I realized I had to play this very carefully. I wasn't just a homeowner with a grievance anymore. I was up against a criminal network that had infiltrated the very fabric of the city itself. I needed more than just evidence. I needed an ally who could help me expose everything without getting swept into the chaos. That's when I decided to reach out to Detective Matthews, a former officer who had worked on several high-profile corruption cases before being forced out under mysterious circumstances. He had connections, and more importantly, he was someone who wouldn't be intimidated by Karen's influence. I met with him in a small cafe on the outskirts of town, my nerves tightening with each step I took. "Karen's been pulling the strings for years," I said as I handed him the files. "These aren't just some petty HOA violations. She's been running a global operation, hiding money, and exploiting people, and I need your help to bring her down." Matthews looked over the documents carefully, his expression unreadable. After what felt like an eternity, he nodded. "This is big," he said, "and it's dangerous. You've got your work cut out for you. But we've been tracking some of the money trails you're talking about. Karen's network is deep, but we might have a way in." The fact that Matthews was already aware of Karen's activities, albeit in a different context, was a relief. But I knew this wouldn't be easy. With Karen's influence, any misstep could be catastrophic, and the deeper we dug, the more likely she'd take drastic measures to silence us. It wasn't long before things started escalating. My phone, which had been relatively quiet for days, began buzzing nonstop. I received strange calls from block numbers, followed by unmarked envelopes left on my doorstep. They were warning shots, I knew that much. Karen's people were trying to intimidate me, to make me back off. But I wasn't about to quit now. I had seen what she was capable of, and I wasn't going to let her win. The time for small steps was over. It was time to expose her for everything she had done. I worked with Matthews to finalize a plan. We would need to expose her web of influence at the right moment. The public would be crucial in bringing her down, but we had to make sure everything was airtight. We couldn't afford any slip-ups. The investigation picked up steam, and we started coordinating with other city officials, activists, and journalists who had been tracking Karen's activities. It was all coming together, and it felt like we were closing in on her. But Karen was no fool. She had already started taking steps to cover her tracks, moving money, liquidating assets, and preparing to flee the country. Then came the phone call I'd been dreading. It was from Sarah, and the panic in her voice was impossible to ignore. "She's making a move," Sarah said. Her words rushed. "I've been tracking her accounts, and she's moving everything. If we don't act now, she'll disappear with it all." I felt the blood drain from my face. This was it, the moment of truth. If Karen managed to cover her tracks, we wouldn't be able to catch her. She had been preparing for this day for months, if not years. It was a race against time, and Karen was ahead. Matthews and I worked quickly to bring the case to a head. We got the local news involved, setting up a sting operation that would force Karen's hand. We had to act before she could flee, before she could wipe everything clean. The plan was risky, but it was our only shot at catching her in the act. That night, we coordinated with the media and the authorities. It was all set up. We were about to expose Karen's empire, but as we prepared to move in, something unexpected happened. The news outlets were already reporting on Karen's activities. Someone had leaked information to the press. It was as if the entire city had been waiting for the moment when her empire would collapse. The walls were closing in on her, and she had nowhere to run. But as the authorities moved in, I couldn't help but wonder, would Karen really go down so easily? Or was this just the beginning of an even bigger battle? There was no doubt that her network ran deep, and if we were going to take her down, we needed to be prepared for anything. As the authorities moved in, I watched with a mix of anticipation and dread. This was the moment that would decide everything. The evidence was there. The press was in full force, and yet something didn't sit right with me. Was it really going to be this simple? Was Karen really about to go down without a fight? I kept my phone in hand, waiting for the first sign that the operation was a success. Minutes passed, then hours. I sat in a small back room, watching the news reports flash across the screen. The air in the room grew heavier with every passing minute. Where was the breaking news that would mark the end of Karen's reign? Then, just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, Sarah called. I picked up the phone, hearing a familiar tension in her voice. "It's happening," Sarah said, but there was an edge to her words. But there's a twist. Karen wasn't at her safe house. We've been following her for days, but it seems like she was tipped off. She's disappeared. My heart skipped a beat. Disappeared? That wasn't possible. We had every exit covered. We had followed her every move. tracked her transactions, and now, just like that, she was gone. What do you mean, disappeared? I asked, trying to process what she was saying. She's gone off the grid. We've checked her bank accounts. There's no sign of any big withdrawals, but she's taken everything into hiding. And here's the kicker. She's managed to erase all traces of her illegal dealings. I was in disbelief. This couldn't be happening. We had her. We had the evidence. The press was on it. There was no way she could escape now. But Sarah wasn't done. There's more. We believe she's already got new identities set up. I'm talking about fake passports, bank accounts, and her connections in the real estate world. She's ready to vanish, and we're running out of time to stop her. I sat back, feeling the weight of her words crash down on me. Karen wasn't just a neighborhood villain. She had planned for this, and she had prepared for the moment when she would have to run. She was connected, dangerous, and clearly ruthless enough to burn everything down to protect herself. I couldn't let it end like this. Not after everything I had uncovered. Not after watching her manipulate and control people's lives for so long. I had to find her, and I had to bring her to justice. What do we do now? I asked Sarah, knowing she had been working tirelessly on this case alongside the authorities. We need to start from scratch, she said. We need to find her network, track down the people she's been working with, and make sure the right people are involved. If we go after her directly, we might never catch her. We need to break down her connections first and see where they lead. I agreed, but a feeling of unease lingered. Karen had always been 2 steps ahead of us. She had controlled the HOA, the developers, the entire neighborhood, and now she was slipping away. This wasn't just a simple case anymore. It was a race against time, and Karen had the advantage. Sarah and I worked together, pulling every piece of evidence we could find. We dug deeper into the shell companies, the fake documents, and the people who had worked alongside Karen. But every lead seemed to fizzle out just as quickly as it appeared. It was like Karen had erased herself from existence. Then a breakthrough came. A former business partner of Karen's, who had recently cut ties with her, came forward with new information. His name was Thomas, and while he hadn't been directly involved in any of the illegal activities, he had seen enough to know that something wasn't right. I don't know exactly what she's up to, Thomas said, but I do know this. She's been working with people in the tech world, people who specialize in hiding digital traces. I saw her make a deal with someone a few months ago, someone with connections to the dark web. That was the lead I needed. Dark web connections? If Karen was involved in anything that shady, then we were dealing with more than just a few real estate frauds. We were dealing with a whole new level of corruption. Thomas wasn't sure who the tech contacts were, but he had a hunch that they were linked to some of the larger developers in the city, people with resources beyond anything we had seen before. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but they were still scattered. We contacted the authorities and let them know what we had learned. They began focusing on tech companies with ties to the dark web, hoping to narrow down the list of people who could help Karen disappear. But Karen wasn't just hiding from us. She was actively protecting herself. She had covered every angle, every back door, leaving us with little to follow. That's when the next shock came. One of the developers Karen had been working with was arrested on unrelated charges. It was an opportunity we couldn't afford to waste. The authorities managed to get a warrant for his assets, and it was there, hidden in a pile of paperwork, that they found it, a digital ledger, a list of names, dates, and transactions that linked Karen to several high-profile international criminals. But there was something else too, something that stood out like a red flag. One of the names on that list was a local politician, someone who had been publicly aligned with Karen's HOA projects, someone who had the power to protect her. I had no idea what this meant for our case, but it was clear that Karen wasn't working alone. She had powerful allies in high places. I couldn't believe what we had just stumbled upon. The politician's name on that list was a game changer. Karen wasn't just an HOA tyrant. She had connections in some of the most powerful places in the city. If this politician was involved, it meant that Karen's entire network was much larger than we had initially thought. This wasn't just about a few shady real estate deals anymore. This was about corruption at the highest levels, and Karen had been manipulating the system to her advantage for years. I immediately contacted Sarah, who was working late that night, trying to piece together the puzzle. "Sarah, we need to go over something. I just found something huge," I said, my voice urgent. Sarah picked up on the first ring. "What did you find?" she asked, sensing the seriousness in my tone. "The politician we've been tracking. His name's on the list of transactions. He's been working with Karen, using his influence to help her cover up the money laundering. This goes beyond what we imagined." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "This changes everything. If we're right, we need to move fast. This could escalate quickly. I don't need to tell you how dangerous it is to go after someone with political power. We have to be careful." I knew she was right. With the authorities already closing in on Karen, this new development added another layer of complexity. The stakes had been raised even higher. Now, we weren't just dealing with a neighborhood tyrant. We were potentially facing an entire network of powerful people who had been enabling Karen's schemes. We decided to keep everything under wraps for the moment. The last thing we needed was for Karen to catch wind of what we were uncovering. If she found out that we knew about her connections, she would act fast to cover her tracks, and that could destroy everything we had worked for. We had to move carefully and be strategic in our next steps. The next few days were a blur of activity. Sarah and I worked tirelessly, sifting through more documents and gathering as much evidence as we could. We tried to get in touch with the politician's office, but all calls went unanswered. That didn't surprise me. People like him didn't get caught easily. He was connected, protected, and likely aware of the risks of being exposed. But then, I received another shocking piece of information. The politician had been spotted meeting with several of Karen's associates at a private property on the outskirts of the city. This was our chance. If we could get there before they scattered, we could find the proof we needed to finally bring Karen and her associates down. I contacted Matthews, the detective who had been helping us from the start. "We have a lead on the politician. We think they're planning a meeting at a private location," I told him. "This could be the break we need." Matthews was quick to respond. "I'll get a team together. We'll monitor the location and move in when we have the chance. But we have to be careful. If this politician is involved, this could be a bigger operation than we thought." We agreed to wait for backup and move when the time was right. But as I sat there, waiting for the plan to unfold, something in the back of my mind kept nagging at me. What if Karen wasn't planning to run anymore? What if, instead, she was setting us up for a much bigger fall? Every time I thought we were one step closer to catching her, it felt like she had already thought 5 steps ahead. The next morning, we got the call. The authorities were closing in on the meeting spot, and Matthews was ready to move in. We weren't the only ones watching that property. There was something about the way Karen's associates had been acting lately that told me they knew their time was running out. It was only a matter of time before they tried to pull the rug out from under us. I rushed to the scene with Sarah, adrenaline coursing through me. When we arrived, the area was crawling with law enforcement. Matthews and his team were in place, ready to make the arrests. We waited for the right moment, hearts pounding, knowing that we were about to get the answers we had been looking for. But then, just as Matthews gave the signal to move in, something unexpected happened. A black SUV rolled into the property, and out stepped Karen. I couldn't believe it. She was here, in the open, and it seemed like she was waiting for something. Or someone. "Is she meeting with a politician?" Sarah whispered, her eyes fixed on Karen as she walked toward the building. I nodded. "It looks like it. This could be our chance to catch everything on tape." But as Karen entered the building, I realized something even more troubling. There was no sign of the politician. Had he backed out? Or was Karen setting us up, knowing we'd come for her? My heart raced as I watched her disappear inside. The stakes had just escalated. If we didn't move fast, we could lose our chance to expose her, and the web of corruption she had woven would stay intact. The tension in the air was thick as Matthews and his team prepared to move in. Every second felt like an eternity. But just before the plan was set into motion, an unexpected twist came. A man in a suit emerged from the building. He was tall, confident, and his face looked strangely familiar. "Who's that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Sarah's face paled as she recognized him. "That's the politician. He's here." I felt the ground shift beneath me. This was it. Karen had been using the politician to cover her tracks, and now they were meeting in plain sight, in front of everyone. We couldn't let this opportunity slip away. But as I reached for my phone to alert Matthews, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Karen was walking toward the man, and there was no sign of the authorities. She was meeting with him as if nothing was happening, as if this was all part of the plan. Suddenly, I realized the horrifying truth. Karen was in control of this entire situation. She had known we were coming. She had planned for this moment all along. And now, she was using us to execute her final move. As I watched Karen and the politician converse, my mind raced. Everything I had worked for, everything I had uncovered, was about to collapse if I didn't act. The authorities were still waiting for their signal, but Karen had already played her cards. She knew we were coming, and now, she was controlling the situation. I quickly called Matthews. "We've got a problem," I said, my voice tight with urgency. "Karen's meeting with the politician right now, and we're not the only ones watching. She's in full control of this situation." Matthews responded quickly. "Stay put. We're moving in. We have eyes on the politician. Don't do anything rash." But it felt like time was slipping away. Every second felt like an eternity, and the more I watched, the more it became clear that Karen wasn't just the mastermind of the HOA scheme. I had underestimated her. She was playing a game of high stakes, and I was nothing more than a pawn in her plan. I turned to Sarah, who had been watching silently. "We can't wait any longer. If we don't move now, she'll vanish, and all this work will be for nothing." She hesitated, clearly torn. "I know, but we can't do this alone. If we rush in without backup, we might tip off Karen, and she'll slip through our fingers. We need to wait for Matthews." But as I looked back at the meeting unfolding before me, I couldn't wait any longer. I had to do something, anything, to expose Karen. I decided to make a move on my own, knowing that I might be walking straight into a trap. I slipped through the crowd, careful to stay out of sight. My heart pounded in my chest as I crept closer to where Karen and the politician were talking. The voices grew louder, but I still couldn't hear what they were saying. I had to get closer. The information I had was too valuable, and this could be the moment I had been waiting for. Just as I approached the door, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd, one I had seen before, but I couldn't place. The man was standing by the entrance, scanning the area as if waiting for something. My instincts told me he wasn't just a passerby. He had to be one of Karen's associates. I ducked back into the shadows, realizing that I had walked straight into another of Karen's traps. This wasn't a simple conversation. It was a well-orchestrated meeting, a setup to lure me in. She had known I'd try something like this, and now I was cornered. The man at the door started moving toward the building. I couldn't afford to be seen. My options were limited, but I knew I had to get out of there before I was caught. I quickly retreated, blending into the crowd and slipping out of sight. As I made my way back to the car, I was shaken. I had been so focused on exposing Karen that I had walked right into her game. She had anticipated everything. The politician wasn't just a figurehead. He was actively involved in this operation, and now I had no idea what my next move would be. When I got to the car, I called Sarah, my hands shaking. "She's playing us." She knew I'd try to do something stupid. "We need to regroup." "What happened?" she asked, her voice filled with concern. "I almost got caught," I admitted. "Karen is too smart for this. She's in full control now. We have to move faster. If we don't act soon, she'll slip away with everything." After a few minutes of tense silence, Sarah spoke again. "Let's head back to the station. We need to talk to Matthews and reassess our plan." We made our way back, but as we were driving, my mind kept racing. Karen had always been one step ahead, and now she was outplaying us at every turn. She had anticipated everything we'd do and had made sure that every move we made would be countered. This wasn't just a fight for control of the neighborhood anymore. It was a battle to expose a global network of corruption that spanned far beyond our reach. When we got to the station, Matthews was waiting for us. He had been monitoring the situation, but he wasn't happy. "We've got eyes on the meeting, but Karen is being careful. She's taking steps to cover her tracks. We can't move on her just yet." "She knows we're coming," I said, pacing in frustration. She's already planning her next move. We need to hit her hard and fast, or she'll escape before we can do anything." Matthews looked grim. "We've got the evidence, but she's got people in the right places. This isn't just a neighborhood dispute anymore. We need to bring in more resources, get the feds involved." I stared at him, knowing he was right. We had to bring in the heavy hitters. But even with the FBI's involvement, I couldn't help but feel the pressure mounting. Karen had made it clear she wasn't going down without a fight, and the deeper we dug, the more dangerous it became. "We don't have much time," I said, my voice low. "We need to figure out her next move before she can cover it up. If she escapes, it's over." We worked through the night, going over every lead and every piece of evidence we had. But as the hours passed, I realized just how big this operation was. It wasn't just about the HOA or the neighborhood anymore. Karen had been involved in international deals, real estate fraud, money laundering, and so much more. Her network was sprawling, and she had left no stone unturned. It felt like we were getting closer, but every step forward felt like it only revealed a deeper, darker side of Karen's empire. The more we uncovered, the more we realized that this was bigger than just her. It was about exposing a system of corruption that had been running under the radar for years. But Karen wasn't just sitting idly by. As we continued to dig, she was making moves of her own, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The following days were filled with an intensity one couldn't have prepared for. Every move we made seemed to provoke Karen, but at the same time, she was becoming more elusive. I had underestimated how powerful she was, how far her influence reached. She was no longer just the president of an HOA. She had become a mastermind orchestrating a global operation. And now, with everything coming to light, I knew there was no way I could back out of this. The authorities had agreed to widen the investigation, bringing in federal resources. But every time we thought we were closing in, Karen found a way to cover her tracks, to slip through our fingers. Matthews had become increasingly frustrated, but I could see the determination in his eyes. We weren't going to let her get away with this, not after everything she had done. One evening, as I sat at my desk going over the latest evidence, I received a strange email. It was brief but direct. "She knows. It's only a matter of time before she disappears. You're too close." No name, no contact details, just that chilling warning. I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of it. Was this a threat from Karen herself, or was it from someone else in her network? Either way, it felt like a shot across the bow, a warning to back off. But I wasn't backing off. I couldn't. I immediately forwarded the email to Matthews and Sarah, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Karen wasn't playing around anymore. She had gone into survival mode, and that meant we had to be even more strategic if we were going to take her down. Sarah, always the strategist, suggested we focus on the financial side of things. If we hit her where it hurts, the money, will force her to make a mistake. She can't hide forever. It made sense, but it also felt risky. If we made one wrong move, we could lose everything. The next day, we started to comb through the financial records again, looking for any inconsistencies or hidden assets. There had to be something we missed, something that would expose her final game. The more we dug, the more I began to realize just how extensive her network was. Every time we uncovered a piece of the puzzle, it felt like another layer of the operation was waiting to be exposed. Then, just as we were starting to make some headway, another blow came. Matthews informed us that Karen's lawyer had filed for a gag order, preventing any further public disclosures about the ongoing investigation. It was a legal maneuver, one that could stifle everything we had worked for. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Karen was making her move, trying to block the evidence before it went too far. "We can't let this happen," I said, the frustration seeping into my voice. "She's getting desperate, but we need to act now. We need to expose her before she can shut us down." Matthews, ever the professional, suggested we go through a different channel, bypassing the legal roadblocks Karen had thrown up. "We go public with everything we have, court documents, financial records, everything. The media will pick it up, and once the public gets a hold of it, there'll be no way she can stop it." It was a dangerous move, but it was our only shot. If we went public, we would be risking not just our safety, but our reputations as well. But at this point, There was no turning back. Karen had pushed us to the edge, and now it was time to expose everything. We reached out to a trusted investigative journalist who had been following Karen's movements for weeks. She had a reputation for uncovering corruption at the highest levels, and I knew she would be the right person to help us blow this wide open. We met in a small, secluded cafe, away from prying eyes. "This is bigger than I thought," the journalist said after going over the evidence. "We've got everything we need. The only question now is, how do we get it to the public without putting ourselves in danger?" The answer came swiftly. The journalist suggested a strategic leak. We release enough information to the public, but leave enough gaps to keep Karen scrambling. She won't be able to cover everything at once, and we'll force her hand. It felt like the right move. We had the media behind us, and with Karen's legal attempts to block the investigation already public, it was clear that she was already on the defensive. The pressure was mounting, and we were about to turn up the heat. The following morning, everything went live. The documents, the financial records, the connections to the dark web, everything was exposed. The media coverage was instant, and Karen's name was plastered across every major news outlet. The public was shocked, outraged, and desperate for answers. It was like watching a house of cards tumble, each revelation causing more chaos than the last. But even as the world began to take notice, Karen wasn't done. She wasn't going to sit idly by while her empire crumbled. As the story unfolded, I could feel the weight of the situation growing heavier. Karen was a woman cornered, and when someone like her is cornered, they'll stop at nothing to protect themselves. Later that night, as I sat at my desk, staring at the media frenzy surrounding Karen's downfall, a message popped up on my screen. It was from an unknown number. "You've made a mistake. You have no idea what you're up against. This isn't just about Karen. You're messing with forces you can't control." The message sent a chill down my spine. Karen was still out there, and her reach was far greater than I had realized. The investigation had just taken a dangerous turn, and I was now more certain than ever that Karen had connections that reached far beyond the city. Whoever sent that message knew more than they were letting on, and it was clear they didn't want me to uncover the full truth. I had a choice to make. We had exposed Karen's crimes, but the real question was, how far would I go to make sure she paid for them? How much danger was I willing to put myself in to bring down this network? The game was far from over. It was just beginning. The message lingered in my mind, the words echoing as I sat in front of my computer, trying to focus. I couldn't ignore it. "You're messing with forces you can't control." What did that even mean? Karen was bad enough, but now there were others involved. People who clearly had more power and more resources than I had ever imagined. The deeper I dug, the more I realized that I was only scratching the surface. I turned to Sarah, who was sitting across the room, looking at the latest news reports. "Did you see this?" she asked, her voice sharp with concern. I walked over to where she sat and looked at the screen. The news was covering the ongoing investigation into Karen, but there was something new. A statement from a city official denying all knowledge of Karen's involvement in any illegal activities. "They're trying to cover it up," I said, feeling the weight of the conspiracy sinking in. There's no way Karen could have done this alone. She's connected to people in high places. Sarah nodded, her eyes narrowing. "And now they're trying to discredit the investigation before it even gets started. We've got to be ready for what's coming next." It was clear now that Karen wasn't just trying to escape. She had been setting things up behind the scenes, working with a network of powerful individuals who would stop at nothing to protect her. The politicians, the developers, the people with access to money and influence. They were all part of her plan. We knew that the next steps were critical. If we waited too long, Karen and her associates would find a way to escape or destroy the evidence. But if we moved too quickly, we could tip them off and lose the opportunity. The stakes were higher than ever. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced as I thought through the details of the investigation, the connections, the people Karen had manipulated. But one thing kept nagging at me. Who was behind the anonymous message? Was it just a warning from Karen, or was there something more to it? It didn't feel like a random threat. It felt calculated. The next day, I met with Matthews to discuss the next phase of the investigation. "We need to dig deeper into Karen's associates," Matthews said. We've uncovered a lot, but we still don't know who's really pulling the strings. If we can find out who's financing her activities, we might be able to take down the entire operation." I agreed, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like a needle in a haystack. Karen had covered her tracks well. The money she'd made from real estate deals, the connections she had in the tech world, and the shady dealings that went through various companies. It was hard to piece it all together, but we couldn't afford to waste time. If Karen was already planning her escape, we needed to strike before she disappeared for good. That afternoon, as I was going through some of the financial documents again, I noticed something strange. One of Karen's properties, one that had seemed insignificant at first, had been sold recently, but the transaction didn't match any of the other ones in the records. The sale was listed under a different name, and the buyer was someone I hadn't seen in any of the documents before. It was the kind of red flag I'd been waiting for. I traced the name, and it led me to a company based overseas. The name didn't ring any bells, but the address listed was a shell company in a tax haven. It was like Karen had set up an offshore account to hide the proceeds from the sale. And the buyer? Someone who was listed as a developer with connections to several of the other corrupt projects Karen had been involved in. I couldn't believe it. Karen was using shell companies to funnel money out of the country, making it even harder to track. But now I had a lead. I needed to get more information, and fast. I immediately contacted Sarah, filling her in on what I'd found. "We've got a new lead," I said, feeling a surge of hope. "There's a company behind that property sale. We need to track it down." She responded quickly. "I'm on it. I'll dig into the company's background. But be careful. This could be the connection that Karen's been hiding. If we're right, she's going to make her move soon." We worked in parallel, Sarah digging into the company's records while I kept pushing the authorities for more help. It wasn't long before we discovered that the company had ties to an international money laundering ring. They had been buying up properties in the area under false pretenses, hiding the transactions in plain sight. And the more we uncovered, the more it became clear that Karen had been at the center of it all, pulling the strings. We were getting closer, but the pressure was mounting. Every time we uncovered a new piece of information, it felt like we were unraveling a thread in a much larger web. Karen wasn't just a small-time fraudster anymore. She was involved in something massive, something that could destroy entire industries. Then, just as we were getting ready to bring the authorities in for the final push, something unexpected happened. A new lead came through. Someone from within Karen's circle had reached out to us. They claimed to have information that could bring her down for good. But there was a catch. They wouldn't go to the authorities unless they were guaranteed immunity. The offer was too good to ignore. If we could work with this insider, we might be able to bring down Karen's entire operation in one go. But it was a dangerous game. Who could we trust? How did we know the insider wasn't just another one of Karen's pawns? I couldn't afford to hesitate. The weight of everything I had learned about Karen's operation hung heavily on me, and I knew that if we didn't act fast, we could lose our only chance to take her down. The offer from the insider was tempting, but it was also a risk. If they were really trying to help, this could be the break we needed. If they were trying to manipulate us, we could end up feeding right into Karen's hands. I called Sarah immediately. "We've got a new lead," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone from inside Karen's circle wants to talk. They say they can bring her down, but they want immunity in exchange." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "This could be our opportunity, but it could also be a trap. We need to be cautious." I agreed, but I also knew we couldn't afford to miss this chance. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how fragile the situation was. Karen was on the brink of disappearing, and if this insider had the information we needed, it could be the final key to exposing everything. After a tense few hours, we arranged a meeting with the insider. They insisted on meeting in a public place, away from any potential surveillance. We chose a quiet cafe, somewhere we could talk without drawing attention. When I arrived, I saw the person sitting at a table in the corner, an older man, dressed in a plain suit. He looked nervous, constantly glancing around as if he expected someone to appear at any moment. I sat down across from him, my heart pounding in my chest. "You said you had information that could take down Karen. What do you know?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. I worked with her for years. I helped her build the network, and I've seen how deep it runs. She's not just some local criminal. She's connected to global operations, and she's been laundering money for some of the most powerful people in the world. My stomach churned. The scale of what he was describing was far beyond what I had imagined. I had suspected that Karen was part of something bigger, but to hear it confirmed in such stark terms was almost overwhelming. I have records, files, and emails that can prove everything, he continued, his voice lowering to a whisper. But if I hand them over, I need protection. The people Karen works with are dangerous. If they find out I'm talking, I'm as good as dead. I nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. We can offer protection, I said, trying to reassure him. But we need those files. We need to bring Karen and everyone involved down for good. The insider hesitated for a moment before pulling out a flash drive from his coat pocket. This is everything. The transactions, the connections, the hidden accounts. It's all there. But you have to promise me one thing. You'll make sure I'm safe. If Karen finds out I'm the one who helped, she'll make sure I disappear. As I stood there, looking at the flash drive in my hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story wasn't over yet. There was so much left to uncover. And as much as I wanted to believe this would be the end, I knew it wasn't going to be that easy. Karen had always found a way to outsmart us. This final showdown was about to get even more dangerous. But I had come this far, and there was no turning back now. The journey isn't over yet, and the twists keep coming. If you want to see how this unfolds and find out whether Karen's empire will crumble or if she'll slip away once again, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. The truth is still out there, and you won't want to miss what happens next. Stay tuned for the next chapter in this wild ride.